Title: The Man Behind the Mask. The wind howled like a predator, fierce and unrelenting, as it blew thick sheets of snow across the highway. Justin could barely see past the hood of his truck, the snowstorm swallowing up everything in sight. Traverse City was in the grips of a brutal winter storm, and every road leading to the hospital was blocked by snow or accidents. Inside the truck, Justin's wife, Jessica, let out a heart-wrenching scream, her face contorted with pain. She was in labor, and her water had broken nearly 20 minutes ago. Now the contractions were coming faster, her body shuddering with each one. "Justin, please," she cried, her voice sharp with desperation. "We need to get to the hospital, now." "I'm trying," Justin replied, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing cold. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. He was afraid, more afraid than he'd ever been in his life. But not just for his wife and unborn child. He was afraid of himself. He had always known he wasn't like other people. Beneath the surface, something dark simmered, a hunger he had tried to bury for years. But it always lingered, whispering to him in moments of weakness. He had spent years perfecting the mask he wore for the world, the loving husband, the charming neighbor. But the mask had slipped before, briefly, when no one was looking. And now, with the storm isolating them and his wife in agony, the mask was cracking. Jessica's cries broke through his thoughts, bringing him back to the present. "Justin, the baby's coming now," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You have to help me. Please, I can't do this alone." He nodded, his heart pounding in his chest, and fumbled to recall what he knew about childbirth. He had seen enough documentaries, read enough, to understand the basics. He unbuckled her seatbelt and helped her recline the seat back as much as it would go. "Okay, Jess, breathe," he said, trying to sound calm even as his hands trembled. "We're going to do this together. Just breathe and push when you need to." Jessica's body convulsed with the next contraction, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she pushed. The inside of the truck was stifling despite the storm outside, and Justin could smell the sharp tang of sweat and fear. Then, he saw it. The blood. It was everywhere, spreading across the seat, soaking into the fabric. He could hear the wet, sticky sounds of the baby, forcing its way out. For a moment, everything else faded. The storm, Jessica's screams, the truck itself. Justin was transfixed by the sight of the blood, his eyes wide. A strange sensation welled up in his chest. Something familiar, yet terrifying. It was a feeling he had fought to suppress for so long. Bloodlust. Jessica's screams blurred into the background as his focus narrowed on the crimson stains, the warmth of the blood, the life draining from her body. It was hypnotic, a dark ecstasy bubbling to the surface. Justin felt his lips curl into a smile, tears streaming down his face as he tried to process the conflicting emotions. He loved Jessica. He thought he did. But the blood. God, the blood. Jessica's cries grew weaker, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at her husband, pleading with him, not just for help, but for some recognition of the man she loved. "Justin, please," she whimpered, her voice barely a whisper. But Justin was no longer there, not fully. He was somewhere deeper, darker, a place where the thrill of violence and the rush of power drowned out everything else. He watched, detached, as Jessica's body slumped back, her eyes still open, staring at him but seeing nothing. The baby. He had forgotten about the baby. There was so much blood. Everything around him went quiet. The storm muffled outside, Jessica's labored breathing now a faint memory. In the eerie stillness, Justin stared at his wife's lifeless body, her tears frozen on her cheeks, her eyes fixed on him as if in eternal accusation. He felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. I should get to the hospital," he muttered to himself, his voice shaky. But something in him, something dark and primal, stopped him. What was the point now? Jessica was gone, the baby too. But for the first time in his life, Justin felt free. The burden of his normal life, the weight of pretending was slipping away. He didn't have to hide anymore. Not from her, not from anyone. He glanced at the rearview mirror, his reflection staring back at him with wide, unblinking eyes. The mask was gone now, shattered by the blood and the storm. He was himself, the man he had always been, the one behind the mask. But what to do with the body? Justin's mind raced. He couldn't just leave her here. People would ask questions, friends, family. He needed to be smart, to plan. They would expect him to be devastated, broken by grief. He could play that part. He had been playing roles all his life, but first, he had to get rid of the evidence. He reached over, brushing a strand of hair from Jessica's cold face, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I'll take care of you, Jess," he whispered softly, before starting the engine and turning the truck around. He wasn't going to the hospital. He was going home. There, in the isolation of the storm, Justin would figure out his next move. He had spent years hiding from his true nature. But now, with the storm raging outside and his wife's blood still warm on his hands, he was finally ready to embrace it.